creativity knows no boundaries. And by way of proof, consider this story from Luke Burbank.
The red's at the top. I put some blue in here, and then put some yellow in here.
Monica Valentine's art is a study in color.
Can you hold up the small beads and so I can kind of see what those look like?
Yeah.
Made up of thousands of small beads and sequins.
That's so small.
Yep.
Threaded on a pin and attached to objects.
3 beads in a sequin, yep.
The sculptures are colorful, bedazzled, three-dimensional, and eye-catching.
Are you ready to head upstairs?
And yet Valentine herself has been blind since birth.
All right, we're heading in here. You ready?
Yep.
Okay.
Valentine is one of 140 or so artists that work each day at Creative Growth, a nonprofit art collective in Oakland, California. The center provides its artists with museum-quality supplies, paint, textiles, iPads, and studio assistants who help them with their work, all at no cost to them.
A lot of people have been here for decades and decades.
Ariel Barrick is Creative Growth's volunteer coordinator.
Imagine if you were an artist and you came to an art studio every day and you had all the materials that you needed and you had a bunch of assistants who were...
Sounds pretty awesome.
Yeah, I know.
It's like basically like Jeff Koons and the people here.
Exactly.
Psychologist Elias Katz and his wife Florence, an artist, started Creative Growth in their garage in 1974 before moving to this converted auto body shop.
So this was Sal's auto body?
This was Sal's auto body.
Tom DiMaria has been Creative Growth's executive director for 25 years.
What's going on in 1974? Hippies, feminism, the Black Panthers here in Oakland. It's a time of enormous social change, and that was changing for people with disabilities as well.
Among those changes, a statewide bill that ended mass institutionalization of those with disabilities, flooding California with people in need of resources and services. The Katzes wanted to create a space where those folks could come, make art, and maybe most importantly, actually make a living from their work.
You know, in 1974, that's a radical idea.
To be clear, this is not just art therapy. It's art made by artists who just so happen to have disabilities.
You see that these artists have styles that they work in.
Oh, yeah.
There's a consistency to it.
Right. It's 6 hours a day for 5 days a week for decades. I mean, there's like really incredible art practices that have been developed.
One of Creative Growth's best-known artists is Dan Miller, who is autistic and mostly nonverbal, but communicates, says Tom DiMaria, through his work.
He has word skills, and he clusters words together like poetry, and the fact that he's communicating by writing words in his painting is, you know, it's really important to know that's part of who he is as a person.
Miller's paintings are in the collections of the Museum of Modern Art and the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and he was featured at the Venice Biennale, the so-called Olympics of the art world. Also in that exhibit, the late Judith Scott, one of Creative Growth's first commercially successful artists.
That made a nice kind of little form.
Born with Down syndrome, she was also deaf and never learned to speak or sign.
Can I look?
Scott's signature style was wrapping objects in yarn and scraps of fabric to create colorful organic sculptures that now sell for tens of thousands of dollars. Proceeds from sales are now one of the major sources of Creative Growth's funding.
And that percentage is significant.
Yes, we have art sales that surpass $1 million annually.
Wow.
That money from art sales is split 50-50 between the artists and Creative Growth, just as they might be between other professional artists and their galleries.
How long did it take you to paint all of this?
It takes about 5 months.
This mural by William Scott was on display at a recent exhibit at SF MoMA, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. It featured some of the more than 100 pieces the museum acquired to mark Creative Growth's 50th anniversary. It's the largest collection of its kind in the U.S.
You have art that's in galleries all over the country.
That's right.
How does that feel?
Feels very good.
But those around William Scott say it's not the recognition, but the process that matters for him. Scott, who is autistic, uses his art to work through some very complicated issues. As a child, he spent weeks in a burn unit after an accident. This self-portrait shows two William Scotts, one with scars from those burns, the other showing him healed.
He needs the paintings to be real. He needs the world to change, to meet him, going back in time to paint out histories that he wants to disappear, to change the neighborhoods and the housing where he grew up. His intention is to change the world.
The doctor told me that his chances of being normal was 50-50.
Scott's mother, Edna Lee Arterberry, says she had to fight to provide him with opportunities. It wasn't until he was an adult that she found creative growth.
What's it been like seeing his development as an artist now that he comes here?
This was the place. this was the place that he was supposed to be. They opened the door for him.
I cannot think of a more important art institution in the United States. They pioneered the whole model for working with artists with disabilities, which there are almost 100 of them nationwide, built on Creative Growth's model.
Katie Siegel is SF MoMA's research director and led the acquisition of the museum's collection.
You just can't overestimate the importance of creative growth historically, socially, and also just in the lives of thousands and thousands of individuals. They've given people purpose, helped them find their true calling as an artist.
And those artists are giving back to the art world, too.
We're advancing artists with disabilities into being contemporary and cultural leaders, and they've not really been in that role before. So I think their impact on the greater society can be enormous, will be powerful, will be positive, and we're at a moment right now that will start to unroll.
Five and a half years ago, Conrad Armstrong made a puzzling career change.
And how does a software engineer go to making jigsaw puzzles for a living?
I decided I had made enough money and decided to quit and reinvigorate my hobby of making handmade wooden jigsaw puzzles.
He'd been around puzzles for years.
Right about the time I graduated from college, my father bought a scroll saw, which is actually what's used to make jigsaw puzzles. And I just picked up on the technique.
Each piece is designed and cut by hand, out of wood. Mass-marketed cardboard puzzles may be wildly popular. More than 1 billion are sold each year. But Conrad isn't impressed.
Once you go to wooden, you don't go back to cardboard.
You say that with some disdain.
Well, a little bit. When you have access to a handmade, unique wooden puzzle, a grid-based, stamped-out cardboard puzzle just pales in comparison. Also, here's two straight edges that look like these edge pieces here, right? But there's something interesting about them. They actually form the corner. So there isn't one blocky corner piece. It's hard to find the corner piece.
His designs include waterscapes, autumn scenes, even wedding presents. He's got a waiting list of customers willing to shell out hundreds of dollars to match wits with him.
They're both from the state of Massachusetts.
Where's Massachusetts?
And his carefully designed tricks.
Have you ever designed a puzzle that turned out to be impossible?
No, if people stick through it long enough, they'll eventually solve it.
How long
if you
is
have enough
long
time
enough?
and enough space. Yes. If you have a table that's separate from the table that you need to eat on.
You just leave it there.
For weeks and months if you need to.
Just don't get too attached to the finished product.
A couple times people have asked me what kind of glue can they use, and I shudder. I cringe at that.
So have you ever considered requiring a kind of no glue contract or anything with me?
You know, that's a good idea.
Clearly, designing a good puzzle is an intense business, with each resulting piece its own little work of art.
Whichever way the wind is blowing, design matters, as our Martha Teichner discovered.
The Jaws shark itself is $10,000. As Quint said, you get the head, the tail, and the whole damn thing.
Meet Anthony Holan, who, you might say, owes his career to a shark. Just like this one, the 50th anniversary version of the original that appeared in the movie Jaws, which was shot here on the island of Martha's Vineyard in 1974. There it is, that speck on top of Quint's shack, in case you missed it. But islanders got a look and suddenly wanted sharks of their own. So Travis Tuck, who had been working as a welder on the film and got paid $150 to make that first shark, found himself in business. After Jurassic Park, Steven Spielberg even ordered a velociraptor. Enter Anthony Holland in 1997 as a summer apprentice.
Did you understand instantly that this was going to be your life's calling?
I did not. I thought, you know what, this is a great opportunity. Let's see where it takes me.
By 2001, when he and Travis Tuck made a 10-foot-long Nittany lion, Penn State University's mascot, Holland knew the answer. He took over the workshop when Tuck died in 2002.
What's a vane?
A vane comes from the word fane, which is actually the Anglo-Saxon word for flag.
The earliest recorded weather vane was this one, from 48 BCE in ancient Athens, about the time they were no longer needed to predict weather, to guide ships, or as recognizable branding. Weather vanes became attractive to collectors and thieves. This century-old locomotive sat on top of the train station in White River Junction, Vermont, until it was stolen in 1983. It was finally returned last week after showing up at a New York City auction house.
So you want to take it right up to that dull red without going past.
To make a weather vane, Anthony Holland heats up copper so it becomes pliable, and then hammers it into shape by hand. The art in the craft. He has a 2 to 3 year waiting list for custom weather vanes, most of what he does, and they're expensive.
This started out as a 32-inch whale weather vane and turned into an 11-foot seahorse.
Wow! It cost well into 6 figures and took over a year to construct. Holland is widely considered the country's finest weather vane maker.
The Bhutanese dragon was for a client whose mother was the best friends with the Queen of Bhutan.
He made a school of fish.
So it actually swims in the wind as the wind blows.
These elephants to match someone's well-loved piece of jewelry. And just look at this.
So the owner he owned a satellite at the time. So he was one of the first cell phone providers. So we went all the way back with Mercury and the brick phone.
Whatever a customer wants. For Anthony Holland, that's the fun of it.
I would say the most successful weather vanes that I produce tell a story. I think Americans, we love a good story, right?
On display this morning, a long overdue look at the work of one of America's unsung artists. Alina Cho visits a show of paintings by Stanley Whitney.
You can be certain that a morning at Stanley Whitney's studio will involve 3 things: an abundance of color, a familiar Miles Davis tune, and a deliberately ferocious brushstroke.
For you, that first mark is the top left corner.
Yeah, it is still.
Why? Why there?
It feels good to me. I don't know why. I don't, you don't really worry about why. Why doesn't exist, or even how. It just is.
The works that made Whitney famous are these colorful canvases, 4 horizontal rows of varying hues. But don't call it a grid, or worse, a formula.
Describe it to me.
Color.
But the structure.
Color. It's about rhythm, it's about space, so people can think clear or feel clear.
Whitney grew up in a small black community outside Philadelphia. From a young age, it was clear he was interested in art.
You know, my first devastation was going to first grade and realized I couldn't draw anymore. I had to start reading.
Going to art school spared him from the Vietnam War draft. He moved to New York in 1968. Early on, Whitney focused squarely on making art and little else.
The Black Panthers were asking what you're doing for the race, you know, what are you doing? And
They wanted you to join the struggle.
yeah, right, and I wanted to paint.
So he painted and painted, yet struggled to find an audience.
You had a tough time getting a break.
Well, it was race. It was really race.
Fed up, in the early 1990s, he and his wife, painter Marina Adams, moved to Rome. Inspired by the geometry of the Colosseum and the pyramids in Egypt, the abstract artist had a breakthrough.
The stacking of forms, very basic things. We think about ancient monuments and the stacking. There's no space between those massive rocks, those massive blocks of the pyramids.
Kathleen Chaffee is the curator of Stanley Whitney's first major retrospective at Buffalo's AKG Art Museum.
And he sort of felt this freedom looking at that he didn't need to find landscape anymore. He didn't need to have air. He could allow his colored forms to support each other.
She calls Whitney one of America's greatest living painters.
He's 78 years old. He's been painting for more than 50 years. Why is this his first major retrospective?
I think that attention and scholarship on artists of color is still something that's come later than it should have come. And for an artist like Stanley, I think that's definitely been the case.
This painting I thought was a failure.
Really?
Yeah, I put it in storage. I never showed it.
Many of these works have never been shown in public.
What do you say to the viewer who might look at these paintings and say, they all look the same to me?
I would ask them if the colors remind them of anything. There might be a yellow that reminds you of a blouse your mother had. It's a way in and a way to spend time with them. And it takes you out of your everyday life and gives you a chance to occupy a different kind of space.
A look outside the box that Stanley Whitney hopes sparks something inside, too.
What do you hope people will feel when they look at your work?
Better. Much better. Much better.
It's a concept framers of the Constitution deemed so important, it's in the fine print. The idea that all artwork, at some point, becomes public property. Lee Cowan delves into the universe of public domain.
For nearly 4 decades, United Airlines licensed George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue to be its musical identity. In 2020, however, Gershwin's jazzy classical classic fell out of the friendly skies and landed in the public domain.
What does that mean?
What it means is that the copyright expires. Anyone is free to use and build upon that work.
With no fees, no licensing?
No fees, no licenses, no tracking
permission?
down the person who owns it, no permission.
Jennifer Jenkins, director of the Center for the Study of the Public Domain at Duke University Law School, says there are a lot of famous works that don't belong to their creators anymore.
Peter Pan!
Characters like Peter Pan,
Over there, Dink.
Dracula,
Indeed.
and Frankenstein.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
They're all now owned by us, the public, free for anyone to use to create something fresh.
The public domain doesn't represent the death of copyright. It's just the second part of copyright's life cycle.
The concept of putting an expiration date on intellectual property was something the Founding Fathers actually put in the U.S. Constitution to promote the progress of science and the useful arts. They left it to Congress, however, to decide just how long the copyright term should last.
If copyright lasted forever, it would be very difficult for a lot of creators to make the works they want to make without worrying about being in the crosshairs of a copyright lawsuit.
F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby was published in 1925. Anyone who wanted to use elements from the novel, whether it be Robert Redford,
How do you do, old sport? I'm Gatsby.
or Leonardo DiCaprio,
I'm Gatsby.
had to get permission from the Fitzgerald estate, which held the copyright for 95 years.
That's a really long time.
It is
right?
a long time, yeah.
Do you think it's too long?
I don't think it's too long, and then that's my personal opinion, and I'm obviously biased.
Blake Hazard is F. Scott Fitzgerald's great-granddaughter, and she's a trustee of his estate. When Gatsby finally entered the public domain back in 2021, she watched as a slew of Gatsby-esque projects were waiting at the starting line.
I always hope there'll be some faithfulness, but we don't have any control over it.
You have nothing
So we
now,
just
right?
kind of, exactly. So we just have to kind of embrace that.
Only we know what we've both been through.
She's just been invited to a new post-copyright adaptation of her great-grandfather's work, a Gatsby musical, which opens on Broadway this month.
Hope it's good.
She comes in first,
And
and
then he
then
goes-
he comes in, and then he's like,
Do you want to try that?
Should we try it?
Any group of artists is going to distill down a story through their own lens.
Bigger as in more pointed or bigger as in louder?
The musical's director, Mark Bruni, and writer, Kate Kerrigan.
We didn't want to do something that was wildly different from the novel. We wanted to add perspective and layers to the novel.
The truth is, most works aren't lucky enough to be economically viable for as long as F. Scott Fitzgerald's or Ernest Hemingway's or even Walt Disney's. This year, Steamboat Willie entered the public domain. It unleashed two of the most lucrative rodents in history. To be clear, though, don't go using this Mickey or that Minnie because they're still under copyright. It's only the big-eared couple as they first appeared that's fair game. Still, as soon as those first copyrights expired, we got this. A Mickey slasher film.
We need to go.
The same thing happened when A.A. Milne's Winnie the Pooh entered the public domain. It's that kind of reimagination that many estates fear.
What do you mean, Holmes? Don't you see, my dear Watson?
Sherlock Holmes is one of the most recognized literary characters from the 19th century. But Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's estate began to see its copyrights expire in the 1980s.
Mr. Holmes, apologies for summoning you like this.
Nevertheless, the Conan Doyle estate kept seeking licensing fees, arguing that since some of the later Sherlock Holmes stories were still under copyright, they should own the rights to all the characters still.
At some point, enough is enough.
In 2013, author Les Klinger, one of the leading scholars on Sherlock Holmes, was about to publish this adaptation of the supposedly copyright-free detective when this happened.
The estate contacted that publisher and said, you need a license. And we said to the publisher, no, you don't. We just thought it was wrong, absolutely wrong, and it made us very angry.
So Klinger filed a civil suit in federal court, and he won.
They didn't give up easily. They were trying to squeeze all the juice out of these lemons that they could right up until they've run out of copyright.
Copyright gives rights to creators and their descendants that provide incentives to create. But the public domain really is the soil for future creativity. 1940.
There are surely more copyright clashes ahead, though.
So we got a long wait, huh?
A little bit of a wait, yeah.
Characters like Bugs Bunny,
What's up, Doc?
Superman, and
I'm Batman.
will all find themselves out of copyright protection soon enough. Even Luke Skywalker will eventually find himself in the public domain too. Sometime around 2073. That sure seems like a galaxy far, far away.
The death of a child is an unspeakable tragedy, and for parents left behind, the question becomes how to give meaning to the lives they lost. Jim Axelrod has one family's story about the healing power of art.
There was no way Mark and Jan Lawrence could have known what life would hold for their adorable twins, Will and Joe.
Joey, get on the thing. Stand up. Whoa, big jump.
Yay, Will. Couldn't tell one from the other, and Joe and Will, and who's Joe, who's Will. So they just very quickly became Joe Will.
Even, relatives would, hi, Joe Will.
Oh, you scared me.
No way to know what was coming, and perhaps no way to go on if they had.
These guys weren't just close. There was almost an interconnectedness.
Oh, yeah.
Let Will dance. Oh.
When they were little, if Will fell, Joe cried harder than Will did.
Pushed him.
In high school, the boys discovered art. Their teachers, Basil Smotherman and Vicky Ayers, were stunned by the way they expressed their individuality.
They were living, breathing, and drinking this,
while also remaining tightly connected to each other.
I would walk in on them working, and they'd be looking at each other's work, but they were not saying a word. And I remember joking with them once, are you talking telepathically?
Their senior self-portraits, Will's, a teenage boy with spiky hair and pimples his parents called Big Face, and Joe's, made from thousands of magazine fragments, left no doubt the twins were special.
On average, you wouldn't see this work coming from a high school kid.
After high school, Joe moved to New York City to study at the Cooper Union, while Will was far away at the Art Institute of Chicago.
Did you anticipate there were going to be some issues when it came time to separate?
No.
We just thought they're going to get their own identities and create their own little worlds.
But in the fall of 2004, it became clear those worlds were filled with suffering.
We got a call, and his roommate had said that he attempted to take his life.
Mark and Jan Lawrence, who'd watched their boys' interconnectedness from infancy, knew what threatened one would also threaten the other.
Did any part of you think we better keep a close eye on Will as well?
Well, we did, but Will, he basically stomped his foot and said, I would never do that. Yeah. I would never do that.
But Joe and Will were in the grips of depression. Jan and Mark tried everything. Joe would attempt to take his life again in 2006, but fail. 5 years later, Will would succeed in taking his. He was 26.
Knock at the door.
A knock at the door, yeah. It was a police officer and a chaplain.
And Mark was standing with them, and he said, it's Will, he died. And I fell to the brick entry, and just started screaming.
How did Joe react?
He said, oh, I knew he died the second he died. I knew it.
Yeah. Joe, I read somewhere the way he expressed his feelings.
Right.
He felt like half of him had died as well.
Oh, absolutely.
And he said that. It was just too painful for Joe. After Will was gone, Joe put these together in this scrapbook.
In 2017, 6 years after Will's death, police were once again knocking on the Lawrences' front door.
You knew.
Yeah. I just said to him, I said, it's our son, isn't it?
Joe was 32.
The degree to which you two must have been shattered is incomprehensible.
And it literally is the very beginning. You feel like, how come my arms are so heavy? You don't even feel like you can lift up the glass of water.
A half a dozen years later, where are you with your grief?
You go forward, then you come backwards. The thing is, you're shattered in a million pieces, and then you rebuild your wholeness. You're not going to ever be the same.
Part of the Lawrences' healing was found in their son's work. They'd been prodigious. Sketches, sculptures, paintings.
How much of their stuff do you have?
Hundreds and hundreds of things that are like this scale.
Are they in every closet?
Yeah, under the beds.
Are you still finding work that you didn't know existed?
Yeah.
Stuff keeps surfacing that you think, well, I thought I'd found it all. It's like we always go, hi, Joe, hi, Will. When, you know, something happens, we call them God winks or little winks. So we get winks all the time.
The Lawrences felt those winks had power in them, power they wanted others to feel. Last April, an exhibit opened at the Indianapolis Arts Center. Joe Will, Better Together.
We were delighted to find out we were having twins. We didn't know they were going to be identical twin boys until they were actually born.
Short videos told their story and spread awareness.
Let me tell you something about depression. It's not a personal weakness. It's a medical condition.
More than 100 of their works were curated by exhibitions manager Alex Moore.
If you walk into a space digesting certain struggles of your own and you see those reflected in the objects, that's validating. It tells you that you're not alone. It tells you that your experience is human.
And that life can be a heavy lift, and so maybe seeing somebody else expressing your pain lightens your load.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, I just want to welcome all of you.
Mark and Jan found enormous comfort there.
The boys are here. They're filling the halls. They're talking to us. The boys are here.
Was it therapeutic to be able to visit with them again?
Oh, yeah, it was. Yeah.
We went
at
almost
least every day.
Almost every day
Yeah.
for the 2 months. I mean, I feel like I was not even walking on the ground.
Right.
I felt elevated,
Right.
not just emotionally and spiritually, but physically. I thought, am I levitated?
It was pure joy.
It was magic. They were there.
Which is why outside the Arts Center, in front of this sculpture called Confluence, the Lawrences spread some of their son's ashes. What was supposed to be a limited run of Joe Will's work will now have a permanent gallery. In death, they will continue to educate, inform, and hopefully inspire.
It's almost inconceivable that any mother and father could carry this burden. Why are you telling their story?
I want to celebrate their talent. I don't want to focus on how they died. We want to celebrate their accomplishments and their enduring legacy of the artwork that they left behind. They aren't suffering, they're together, and they are one.
Turns out some trolls get a bum rap, and Lee Cowan has proof.
Unlike happy-go-lucky leprechauns, whom we celebrate today, their close cousins, the trolls, are usually depicted in a less flattering light. As ugly and brainless, with big noses and fat bellies. They are mythical beings that have now gone the way of the fire-breathing dragon. Or have they? If seeing really is believing, what are we to make of this? What about her? What about him?
He is a happy troll, but he is also a really serious troll because you need to take responsibility, and that's why he's pointing, you. Is it your fault, or are you one of the good guys or one of the evil guys?
Oscar the Bird King is a fairy tale that was just coming to life when we visited these woods on Vashon Island near Seattle. His architect, Danish artist Thomas Dambo, wanted to craft this 10,000-pound creature to be both imposing and inviting.
He felt a little bit too human before. He needs to have the trolley and the big branches and the fur and the big beard, and because I don't want people to think it's like human.
Right. Nope, he looks like a troll now, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Oscar isn't the first, nor will he be the last. Dambo has built more than 100 trolls in 17 countries, and no two are alike. Each has its own story. Like Mr. Jack Lumber in Denmark, Hector El Protector in Puerto Rico, Anna of Green in Germany. His Way of the Bird King project is one of the latest in a series of troll sculptures he's been commissioned to build here in the U.S., which includes Benny the Beard Fisher in Michigan, Rita the Rock Planter in Colorado, Pia the Peacekeeper in Washington State. Giants they are, but gentle ones. They aren't here to terrify, he says. They're here to teach, specifically about the one mistake we humans can't seem to outgrow. Our ever-growing piles of trash.
Everything that I do is showing people that trash can have a value, so that trash doesn't need to be a negative thing that's suffocating our world, but it can be a beautiful thing that we can build our coming world with. And a pile like this, that's a dream come true. This is like a regular toy store.
Yep, his trolls are mostly made from recycled wood. Scraps that might otherwise end up in a landfill or just be burned. Discarded shipping pallets are his favorite. A typical troll needs about 5 tons of them.
The world is running out of resources and we're drowning in our own trash. And those two things, they are each other's solution. And that's what my art is about.
Dambo's been dumpster diving ever since he was a kid in Denmark. He says he's always had a peculiar interest in what other people would throw away and how he might repurpose it.
You can build anything out of anything if you're just creative.
So why trolls? Well, Dambo says trolls have always been protectors of our forests. And to create these giant guardians in the woods out of material that used to be forest itself, he hoped would send a powerful but accessible message.
Do most people get it?
Most people get it, and people, they want to be a part of something fun and something beautiful and a positive change. Pretty much everybody want to be a part of that.
That's why everywhere he goes, he enlists armies of local volunteers to help. Like longtime Vashon Island resident Greg Martin.
What have you gotten out of this whole experience personally?
Just an expansion for all of us to look at a different way of doing stuff, a different way of looking at stuff.
Martin will remain as one of Oscar's many caretakers when Dambo and his team move on and leave Oscar behind.
I'm okay that they don't last forever. That's the beauty of wood. It grows out of the ground and it decomposes just straight into the ground again.
But perhaps more than anything, what Thomas Dambo hopes he'll take away from his not-so-trashy trolls is the journey to find them. Some he flat out hides, giving only a few clues to where his fans can find them. But it's in that, he says, that his trolls show their true magic, luring us humans out into the woods where there's just the wind and the whispers of nature. That's when he says his trolls speak the loudest.
I think it's good to remind people that there is soil and sun and water and trees, and that's a big joy for me to give that to people.
All troll tales do have an element of truth. So the next time you're out in the woods, look up at what might be looking down on you and find out just what you believe.
When Mark Rothko died in 1970, he was widely considered one of the greatest artists of the 20th century. Now the roots of his imagination are on display, and Robert Costa is our guide.
His works are mesmerizing and recognized worldwide. Swaths of color and floating fuzzy-edged rectangles, all part of the signature vision of the formidable 20th century artist, Mark Rothko.
Well, everybody knows and loves Rothko's large abstract canvases, but very few people know that he made nearly 3,000 works on paper.
now an exhibit at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., hopes to tell a lesser-known Rothko story, the trail of paperworks the artist left behind. Adam Greenhouse is the curator.
We can see his sources, we can see his early ambitions, his aspirations, and the way that he understands paper to be just as significant and important as his much better known canvases.
Rothko on paper is equally as innovative, and he did not consider these to be studies or prep work.
When you look at these, they don't even seem like paper works, but this is paper.
Yes, indeed. These are mounted in the way that Rothko insisted that his classic format paintings on paper be mounted. So they're attached to either a hard board panel or linen and wrapped around a stretcher or strainer to give them this three-dimensional presence.
Born Marcus Rothkovich in what is now Latvia, he immigrated to Portland, Oregon with his family in the early 1900s. He eventually moved to New York, working, teaching, and struggling, but also learning and evolving as an artist. Many of his early paper works echo other visionaries and hint at what was to come.
You can see the colors in the background. They remind me of a later Rothko.
I think you're right. Some of these sort of blocks of color in the background really point to the later abstractions to come.
He sort of tried to keep a 9 to 5, 9 to 6 schedule, tried to have dinner with the family every night.
Kate Rothko Prezell is the artist's daughter. She says her father was a loving, hard-working man who anchored their family. He was also intense and private, especially when painting.
I, as a smaller child, was fairly often dropped off by my mother at the studio when she needed to get something done. And it was very clear that my father did, even for me at a young age, that my father did not like to be watched painting. He would always set me up in my own corner with my own artwork, with the idea that I was going to be absorbed in my work, he was going to be absorbed in his work.
It was for him this kind of sacred, I think, deeply emotional and psychological process.
Christopher Rothko is the artist's son.
To be distracted during that was something that would be really so counterproductive. So that sort of mystery carries over to his materials. He is known for making a lot of his own paints, taking ground pigments and making his own homebrew. And part of the luminescence that we see in his work is the result of him constantly experimenting, trying to come up with the right concoction. I don't think those were secrets he was particularly guarding, but it was simply part of him making something that was very, very personal.
That sense of intimacy, that emotional truth, is evident today for so many who experience Rothko's work. And with blockbuster exhibits in Paris and Washington.
Maybe you're just supposed to experience it.
And acclaim on television.
You to feel something, right? It's like looking into something very deep.
And at the auction house.
And selling at $77,500,000.
Rothko's popularity is soaring, more than 50 years after his death. Christopher Rothko says his father sought to create a universal language, one that spoke to people's hearts.
I often think about going to a Rothko exhibition, and it's a great place to be alone together. Ultimately, it's a journey we all make ourselves, but so much richer when we do it in the company of others.
This morning, it's not about the postcard, it's about the stamp. Here's Connor Knighton.
Inside his home studio in New Orleans, artist Michael Deas can spend months working on a single oil painting. But collectors need only spend a few cents to own a print of his most popular works. His portraits sell for pennies, 32, 37, sometimes 41.
I have a friend who likes to call me the most famous artist you've never heard of.
Deas has created 25 stamps for the U.S. Postal Service. He's not allowed to sign the paintings, which means he may not be a household name. But his subjects are certainly well known. He's responsible for an impressive gallery of American icons.
When you do a stamp, you're supposed to represent that person. at the high point of their life.
Deas doesn't choose who's getting the stamp treatment. A citizens committee makes recommendations to the Postmaster General, then an art director assigns the work. Over nearly 3 decades, Deas has been asked to paint everyone from U.S. presidents to Hollywood stars. In the early 1990s, Deas had his own brush with Hollywood when Columbia Pictures commissioned him to redesign its logo.
What's it like to see that on the screen?
It's a kick. It's fun to see.
Do you sort of nudge who's ever beside you at the theater? And say,
oh, yeah. Sure, why not?
Despite persistent rumors to the contrary, the Columbia Torch Lady is not Annette Bening. Deas used New Orleans graphic artist Jenny Joseph to model for his oil painting.
I think I would have remembered if Annette Bening had posed for me.
While Deas typically works off photographs, occasionally he's had to do a bit of posing himself.
I had to paint a portrait of Benjamin Franklin for the cover of Time magazine, and I was having trouble working from the existing portraits of him, so I ultimately ended up using myself as a model, because unfortunately I share the same hairline as Benjamin Franklin.
Deas has painted 6 Time covers, primarily presidents. He did magician David Blaine's autobiography, but he keeps coming back to stamps.
Is it lucrative?
No. Definitely not. And that's why I do it, is because it feels like an honor. I've been asked to do something. I consider it a privilege.
The first stamp Deas ever painted was of author and fellow New Orleans resident Tennessee Williams. In addition to depicting the man himself, Deas wanted to pay tribute to Williams' most famous work.
If you look at that stamp very closely, in the background there's a streetcar. And if you look at it with a magnifying glass, there's a single individual sitting on the streetcar, and that's meant to represent Blanche Dubois, who's the heroine of Streetcar Named Desire.
Deas' most recent stamp, this portrait of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, was released last fall. Current regulations stipulate that an individual must be dead for at least 3 years before they can be honored with a stamp.
When is a stamp not just a stamp?
When it's the one you've been waiting for.
Fans of Marilyn Monroe waited decades for her to finally get the stamp treatment in 1995. Deas says his portrait of her remains the best-selling stamp he's ever created.
I draw everything out in pencil, black and white first.
These days, Deas is devoting more time to his personal work, focusing more on an overall scene than on a specific person.
I've spent 40 years painting a lot of images that other people wanted, and now it's time to paint images for myself.
But he's still accepting stamp commissions. He's currently working on 3 top-secret stamps that will come out in 2026. For Deas, the stamps are a way to go beyond the gallery and get miniature works of art into as many hands as possible.
You think about the journey that painting takes?
Often, yes. I try to make every stamp as beautiful as I can, because I think a good stamp, you will notice it. It is not strictly a functional item. If it's done well, it's a little beautiful note on the outside of an envelope, and it can really sort of brighten the thing and become something beautiful. I'm thrilled to do them.
Look, I don't really feel like talking anymore.
Listen, lady, we can do this downtown if you want.
So read me my rights and arrest me, and then I'll go downtown.
It's Sunday Morning on CBS, and here again is Lee Cowan.
She's had some classic roles in movies like Basic Instinct, among others. Then, Sharon Stone suffered a near-fatal health issue. She had to reset both her career and her life. The results are now on display.
There is a world where charcoal-colored snakes coil through clouds of pink and blue, where banyan trees hover almost translucent, where colors curve and nature unravels. A world of acrylic on canvas that you might be surprised to learn comes from the brushstrokes of activist and actor Sharon Stone.
Nature is almost like this free hand of God, if you will. Flowers, tulips, dandelions. You know, you don't have to paint a dandelion exactly like that. You know what I mean?
be what you want it to be.
Yeah, it can be the feeling of the dandelion.
She knows it's easy to be cynical about celebrities trying their hand in the art world. At 65, she's heard all the whispers.
Everybody feels like, well, because she's old.
Yeah.
Because she's old. And she's too old to be a sex symbol anymore. And she's too old to do that. So we can dismiss her into her painting thing.
The reaction so far has been far from negative. Last year, Stone was invited to have a gallery showing in Los Angeles.
This is How I Love the Wind.
Then came this show called Welcome to My Garden. It's currently on view at the C. Parker Gallery in Greenwich, Connecticut.
You don't want people to ever really totally figure out a painting.
The shows have excited both critics and collectors. Her works are now selling for tens of thousands of dollars.
Now it's just a full-on business.
But kind of by accident. You didn't intend it to be.
No, I didn't have any real intentions except just following my passion.
Does it matter whether they're buying it because they love the work or because it's Sharon Stone, the actress? Does it matter to you?
People come to see my art now, first just because it's me. But I feel just fine about that because I've earned being me. But no, I'm totally comfortable if you want to buy my work because it matches your sofa. You know what I mean? No, I'm totally good with that.
There's no smoking in this building, Miss Trammell.
What are you gonna do? Charge me with smoking?
When she hit it big in the 90s with movies like Basic Instinct, it was pretty clear that there was more to Stone than just her looks.
It's nice.
She proved she could hold her own against the likes of Gene Hackman in a Western.
You're not fast enough for me!
Today I am.
And there were few chip fits
I didn't steal anything from you.
like the one Stone threw in Casino.
Well, how about that?
That role got her an Oscar nomination, but Stone says even back then, acting was only a small piece of her personal puzzle.
I can't do that.
Oh, yes, you can. Come on. I'll teach you.
Everybody told me to stay in my lane. You know, and my lane started to just get so narrow.
You were the best assignment I ever had. Really.
I'm honored.
I don't think I'm just an actress or a writer or a painter. I think I'm just an artist.
Oh, I can hear the defense now. Your Honor, Detective Stabler sexually aroused my client to elicit a confession. He was raped at SVU.
The last time we met was back in 2018.
Yeah, and they smell fantastic.
And given the severity of the brain hemorrhage that she told us she suffered 2 decades ago, it's actually a miracle Stone's doing anything, let alone painting.
There was about a 5% chance of me living.
So it affected your speech?
My speech, my hearing.
Walking?
Walking.
Fast forward to 2020, during the pandemic, a friend of hers gave her a paint-by-numbers kit, and she found herself at an easel in her bedroom. She posted the result on Instagram.
It actually looks like something, which I find completely remarkable. I did the paint by numbers with a lot of diligence because I wanted to get my brush strokes together. To have the brush strokes perfect and flawless is a really painstaking, irritating, complicated
exercise, really.
Exercise. It really is a pain in the ass.
But that posterior painting pain did awaken something very familiar. Stone has actually been painting for most of her life. She started as a young girl growing up in rural Pennsylvania, where her aunt taught her almost everything she knew.
You were how old then when she was?
Oh, and
she had
I
murals,
have to show you a picture of her. She was really something.
Oh, look at her.
Right?
Was there any piece of advice in terms of painting that you still call on?
I think just that you're not wrong. There is no wrong.
While attending Edinburgh University of Pennsylvania on a writing scholarship, Stone not only majored in art, but made art to support herself.
I sold every painting I made. I mean, I was selling them for like $25 when I was in college just to eat.
So you really did live the life of a starving artist there for a while.
Oh my God, yeah. I feel what's coming through the canvas here now.
To watch her work all these years later.
It's okay to not know.
Yeah.
You know, and it's also okay to go with not knowing.
Is to watch someone in an almost trance-like state, open to whatever moves her.
I'm letting it start to evolve and tell me what it wants to be. I think if you listen to the highest consciousness and follow that voice, how do you go wrong with that?
So you got to get out of your own
way. Mm-hmm.
All these paintings in a back room of her Beverly Hills home are getting ready to be shipped to Berlin, where Stone will open her very first international show next month. She's certainly not done with acting, but for now at least, Sharon Stone has traded the red carpet for a palette with every color under the sun.
I do it because I'm fully and wholly immersed in it, and I love it, and I have to. It's because I'd rather do it than anything else. And this is my CBS painting. Painted just for you.
Our David Pogue has discovered an artful dimension to that familiar toast, bottoms up.
At this photography exhibit in Las Vegas, you might not know right away what you're looking at.
I would think this one would be like a cross-section of a tree.
I'd say in this one, I see something, maybe a moon effect or planet.
But in fact, these are photos of evaporated whiskey crud.
So the title of the project is Vanishing Spirits, the dried remains of single malt Scotch. After you've taken that last drop or that last sip of whiskey, the residue dries in the bottom of the glass and leaves me these wonderful patterns.
Ernie Button's day job is speech pathology, but his hobbies include photography and drinking Scotch whiskey in the evening. That's how this whole thing began in 2008.
And when I went to collect the glasses in the morning, I noticed this film in the bottom of the glass. And when I held it up to the light, I saw these fine repetitive patterns in the bottom of the glass. I'm like, I can try and do something with this.
So tell me about the color. The whiskey didn't look like that.
It did not. I put different colored lights, different colored gels in from behind. So that's what's giving the purple and the blues and the orange.
And before you do that, what would it look like?
It would look relatively whitish gray. So yeah, nature is giving me the pattern, I'm giving it the life.
These days, he experiments with different kinds of drinking glasses, sheets of glass, and whiskeys from different parts of the world. Have you ever tried chocolate milk? Have you ever tried 7-Up, you know?
I've tried a lot of different alcohols. I found that they have to be aged in a cask. So they have to be in a wooden cask, you know, taking in, you know, all the organic material from the wood into that spirit that was put in there. Tequila, that will work. That will give me some interesting images. Vodka won't.
I mean, you have an area of knowledge that probably nobody in the world has.
Yeah, not sure what to do with it, but...
In fact, he's done plenty with it. His whiskey photos have been featured in the New York Times and in National Geographic. They inspired a published scientific paper, and they're published in a coffee table art book. Is there a takeaway? Is there a lesson?
The ignored or the overlooked can have relevance, can have interest. If you don't look around, if you don't pay attention to the really small things in life, you could miss out on something really big.